My name is Daniel Fanning, and I served a year in Iraq and Kuwait with the 1158th Transportation Company of the Wisconsin Army National Guard. I served from December 2004 through January 2006. I'm currently living and completing my graduate studies in Duluth, Minnesota, and I'm proud to be here with the Minnesota chapter of IVAW. Like so many others did, we talked about this past weekend. I enlisted right after September 11, 2001, out of a sense of duty and patriotism and wanting to somehow help and protect the country. I used to live in New York, and like many of you here, I know I took it very personally. Like many others have said, I'm necessarily against all wars all the time. It's just dumb wars, and I think most wars are dumb, and I think this war in Iraq's the dumbest one yet. I began hearing the grumblings of Iraq while we were actually wrapping up with our AT, my second year in the military. And I immediately had questions, like I know a lot of you did as well, but you don't necessarily buy into, but at least you're hesitant to completely dismiss what your president's saying and what your commanders are saying. So you go in, and when we got activated, although a lot of us had questions, we did what we were told. But having served a year overseas, it only really solidified my fears and my thoughts of what I thought was going on over there. And it really made me 100% confident that the fears and the questions that I had were accurate. And in fact, maybe it was even worse than I anticipated. The fact is, what I saw was progress wasn't being made at all. And in the few places that it was being made, it simply wasn't worth the cost that we were paying to make it. Looking at it from like an economic point of view, the cost-benefit analysis simply isn't worth it. And the opportunity cost that we've endured simply is a major mistake. And this weekend shows that the military has had enough of it. And we are here today to talk about the breakdown in the military. As you can imagine, this is a pretty all-encompassing issue. Testimony has already been given this weekend to point out the many reasons the military is breaking, if not broken. And I remember I was actually in Iraq in 2005 when Lieutenant General Hemley got some controversy for saying that he believed that the reserve forces were rapidly degenerating into a broken force. And that was controversial at the time, but he was right then, and he's never been more right than he is now. There are many reasons for this, including what we just heard. Multiple deployments, unclear and completely bogus missions in the first place, a lack of planning, lack of preparation, a lack of direction and purpose while over there, and a lack of support and resources upon returning home. And other factors such as stop loss and a lack of adequate equipment is what I'm here to talk about today. Not to mention the fact that we're fast approaching the 5th year of this mistake and our 4,000 fallen soldiers, service members. That number doesn't even take into account the countless people that have come home with PTSD and other mental illnesses that have taken their own lives or taken other people's lives, as well as the tens or thousands wounded or both physically and mentally. As a unit, we were fortunate enough not to lose soldiers specifically with our unit, but we did lose people that were attached to us and were providing convoy security. However, upon months of our unit returning home, we lost 2 good friends of mine due to mental illness. One was alcohol and one was just reckless behavior. And I know one personally was seeking support, and I imagine since we were both going through the same VA, he was on the same waiting list that I was on at the time, and ironically I'm still on over 2 years of being home. Such a tragedy. In fact, from a VA standpoint, I've already been tossed around to 3 VAs personally. First Houma, Wisconsin, then Iron Mountain, Michigan, and more recently in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I've yet to be into a VA yet. These long waits and these that are largely due to inadequate funding are definitely responsible for several deaths. Although these names don't always appear on the evening news, and these people don't always die with full military honors or burials. But these are deaths that could have been prevented, as are a lot of other deaths that happened while in theater. For example, when I first arrived in theater in December 2004, our trucks had 0 up-armoring at all. It was right around that time when a brave specialist named Thomas Wilson questioned and criticized Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld about this problem. Our first several missions we didn't have, Our first several missions we didn't have armor at all, or what was affectionately known as hillbilly armor. And that was nothing more than a little thin metal sheet of metal that was literally welded onto the sides of our trucks. It didn't stop bullets. At best, it slowed them down, and it definitely slowed our trucks down as well. But once that brave specialist questioned Rumsfeld, within months, we all got armor. But the problem was that we had already been into that war for a couple of years now. So that definitely hurt our morale of our troops, knowing that it took someone like that, took a brave soldier like that to raise that kind of question and to make it into a media story before we realized that we were finally going to get the equipment that we needed. But that definitely hurt our morale, knowing that it took something like that for the administration to care about us. And the same could be said about the night vision goggles and so many of the other equipment that we had. The NVGs that we had were a joke. I mean, any of us in this room could walk down the street to any department store, to any sports store, and get better equipment. They ran on AA batteries that usually lasted only a couple hours, and they definitely could come in handy several times. I can think of specific incidents. For example, when we experienced an ambush outside of Safwan in southern Iraq at night, and we couldn't even see who was shooting at us. And in fact, the trouble it took us to try to adjust our equipment and try to shake it up so the batteries would work actually hurt us more than it helped us. And I'm not ashamed to admit that, instead of trying to fire because I didn't know where I was firing, I was just kind of cowering behind the small armor that I had because you simply couldn't see where your enemy was. And I don't think any American soldier should ever have to endure that kind of problem. But lack of equipment alone isn't the only problem that's going on overseas. Regardless of what the Pentagon may want to claim, I was definitely inadequately trained. Well, I can tell you that I spent several hours in basic training learning how to use a bayonet, which is something that most people haven't used in combat in several decades. Or spent several months in Fort Benning, Georgia, prior to deployment, learning how to kick down walls and destroy rooms, which is something I personally never had to do. We never received 1 second of cultural training or language training. We encountered Iraqis almost daily on the roads, in the marketplaces, outside of camps and bases, but we had no idea how to interact with them or how to respect them. Instead, while at Fort Benning, we received pep talks from well-paid, hired private contractors who came into our briefing rooms, and they insulted the intelligence of the hundreds of us who enlisted voluntarily to serve our country. I remember like it was yesterday, a chubby white guy came into our room. He was a well-paid contractor and tried telling us that those liberal tree huggers that are saying this war is about oil are so wrong because we're not importing any oil from Iraq at that time. And those of us knew better. I mean, it doesn't take a lot to research that and to realize at the time of invasion we were getting around 10 to 11% of our oil from Iraq. So I'm not saying that's necessarily the only reason we went in, but to have people stand before you while in uniform and lie to you, it's definitely a reason that our morale was hurt, and it's one of the many reasons that lead to the breakdown of the military. While we were overseas, our mission was also unclear. As we've also heard this weekend, our rules of engagement seemed to change daily, based on where we were at the time, based on what the roads were like, based on what was happening in the news, based on who was riding along with us. If we had a member of the media with us, or if we had a colonel or general with us, our rules of engagement did change, to the point where our daily briefings became a joke, literally. We could never predict what our rules of engagement were going to be, and it also depended on what phase of the deployment we were on. When we first got to theater, like I said, we didn't have armor, we just had hillbilly armor, so we were told to always keep our rifles out the window and to engage when we feel threatened. And then once we got armor, we were told just to close the doors, close the windows, and drive on even when fired upon. And to the best of my knowledge, that's the first time in American history that as armed forces, we got sent into combat in harm's way, and we were told that we could not return fire once fired upon. And I think that's a disgrace, and that's another reason why our morale was hurt and why that leads to the breakdown in the military. And as we've also heard this weekend, there were countless kids along the roads of Iraq. As a transportation company, we were on the roads almost every day. And there's just countless kids that lined the roads, especially in urban settings, but even in rural settings. And we were told it was against UCMJ policy to provide these kids with anything, including water or food. So much for winning the hearts and minds, because sometimes these kids would be there and they'd actually cheer us on and give us a thumbs up. And sometimes, literally, those same kids would be there the next day that would be, yelling at us, throwing rocks at us. It definitely depended on what was going on in the area at that time. But we weren't allowed to engage with the children. We weren't allowed to give them food or water. And the same could be said about third country nationals, and we call them TCNs. And to kind of just put that in a nutshell, they were very low-paid men and women, mostly men from third countries, that the United States has hired and basically contracted out for next to nothing, that I thought treated them very poorly, disrespecting them by paying next to nothing. They gave them rations of food, basically just cans of food and a few bottles of water for a few weeks mission. And again, we were told not to assist them or really coordinate with them. But we were responsible for the safety, so that definitely added to the burden of us as a transportation company, because these people came without armor, they came without weapons, most of them didn't know how to speak English or Arabic. So we actually had to guide them. So that added to our mission as well. So that also is something that hurt morale. Although these men that we worked with were actually wonderful people, but they were mistreated, and it's just those kinds of things eventually add up. And we realized that this was necessary because we didn't have enough troops on the ground at the time of invasion, and it led to us depending on basically taking advantage of these oppressed people. And to add insult to injury, those of us both in the military and those of these people who were making next to nothing would be driving down the roads. You know, I made around $30,000 a year while I was overseas, and we'd be passed by the contractors that we just heard about that were making at least 3 or 4 times what we were making. And like he was saying, you know, definitely in some ways had a lot better than we did. So that just adds insult to injury, and these are just, you know, we'd see them pass by in their black SUVs, and they didn't have to follow the same rules of engagement that we had, and didn't have to, you know, engage with the Iraqis the way we did. And again, that just adds insult to injury, and that definitely leads to the breakdown in the military. We worked very long and hot days for very long periods of time, and we were almost always on edge, as you can imagine. And eventually, it simply takes its toll on people. We did lose a few members based on various hardship reasons that eventually got sent home. And it's very hard to see your best friends break down and lose it. It was hard to constantly feel conflicted, knowing full well that, you know, I was in a situation I didn't necessarily want to be in. And the more I got there, I realized I was in a mission that I didn't support at all. But I also knew, whether I liked it or not, that I was serving as an unofficial ambassador to the United States. And I tried to treat the people that I encountered with respect, and that goes from fellow service members to Iraqis to these TCNs that I talked about. And I tried to show them that just because, you know, we all view them and us, I can speak for myself, that we viewed our president as a money-hungry warmonger, that America was still filled with people who really cared about them and were trying to do the right thing. I believe the best way that we could do that for the Iraqi people, and I think my year in service proved that, was to get out of their way and to allow them to start rebuilding the land that they want, the way that they want it. We can and we should help them with this, but our current occupation is doing more to deter that than it is actually assisting that. I moved equipment for Iraq for over a year, and I know the process is a very long and difficult process, and it's very time-consuming. And that's why I think it's imperative that that process start immediately. In summary, there are a lot of factors that are causing the breakdown in the military. I want you to know that I'm very proud of the men and women that I personally served with. They were an outstanding group of men and women, and we didn't have to encounter some of the tragedies that I've heard about this weekend, such as dehumanization and torture. However, I look back in the past 6 years as someone who did enlist after September 11th, and I look back and I wonder, what did I do? I mean, I enlisted to be part of the solution, not part of the problem, but I feel like I did just the opposite. And I know a lot of people in my unit feel the same way. And I think what a disgrace and what a tragedy it is that these are men and women who served mostly with the right intentions, and they were mistreated, and their patriotism and their willingness to serve was exploited and taken advantage of. And I never expected the war or any physical force to be an end-all to these problems that we were facing as a country. Clearly, dealing with real terrorism is going to require a lot more than force. It's going to deal with an examination of foreign policy and oppression and global poverty and those type of serious issues that we should be dealing with. But I did at least hope that our leaders would use the armed forces to help secure our country and to help other countries in a good way. And perhaps I was naive to think that. Not only weren't these actions done, but I do feel that we've actually become less safe as a nation because we've spread anti-American sentiment around the world, and particularly in Iraq, which I think we're all talking about now. Our future generations will have to deal with this, not only financially, but more importantly, because of that hatred that we've helped spread. And lastly, I believe a big reason why the military is breaking is because we've lost some of our best members. Not only because of the death and injuries that we've talked about, but because of those of you who are in the room today and those of us who have gotten out. Those of us who enlisted to do what was right, but wound up getting out because we were asked to do what was wrong. And there are others of you who may have, I know there's people that have different views of the war or different political viewpoints, but nobody can argue against that, the fact that we should have had better equipment, and we should have had better planning, and we should have better preparation, and that we should have better care when we get home. Those who speak against this war are not the treasonous traitors. They are the brave heroes who are honoring the commitment to this country. There's those who have blind loyalty to a dishonest man and to a dishonest administration, those who wave the flag and have a yellow ribbon on their SUV and claim to support the troops, but sit by idly and allow these disgraces to occur. Those are the people that I fear have betrayed our troops and have betrayed our country. And And lastly, I believe if you truly want to support the troops, the best way you can do that is to oppose this war, to help bring this war to an end, to help end this war that we never should have been sent to in the first place. And thank you all so much for being here.